Today is Mozart's birthday. I'm glad that he was alive more than 200 years ago. The after effects of his life have touched and inspired so many in the intervening years and continue to be part of the soundtrack of many lives down to this very hour. Down to this very service. His life stands as a symbol and a representative for so many others in the choir invisible, whose names are less remembered, but whose music, as George Eliot has assured us, is the gladness of the world. Back in the 1960s, the then young songwriter Tom Lehrer said, "It is a sobering thought that when Mozart was my age, he had been dead for 2 years." Today I'm further sobered by the thought that when Mozart was my age, he had been dead for over 30 years. Kind of makes you think. We all have such a short time to do what we are called upon to do. At the very end of his brief 35-year span, Mozart was writing on commission a great requiem, parts of which we are hearing today. It's important to note that he didn't have time to complete it. It is an unfinished work. No matter how much we do and accomplish in life, as was the case with Mozart, we will always leave something undone. It would be comforting to think that we can finish our unfinished business in another stage of life that lies after our death. But is there an afterlife? Is there heaven? Is there more Mozart to come? Is there pie in the sky after you die? Hamlet, in his famous To Be or Not to Be speech, calls death the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. We have, as Shakespeare tells us, no reliable evidence of the nature or even of the existence of an afterlife. Now, there are a number of reasons why we should be extremely skeptical about the possibility of an afterlife. For one thing, all we have to do is consider our before life. What do we know from our personal experience about the time before we were born? To me, that seems pretty much a blank. If there's nothing of us before our lives began, then why should we assume that we continue on in time in one direction when we don't in another? Now, in our ordinary, everyday consciousness, we can hear or feel nothing beyond the boundary of our present life. But there are other ways of thinking or feeling, ways which we call mystical or religious. Now, we get from that experience several kinds of reassurance, which can help to make the shortness of life and the imminence of death more tolerable. One message that I can attest from my own experience, a message that seemed to come to me from the allness of the universe, is that no matter what happens, everything is all right. Now, that came to me one day in a kind of a dream. It was a daydream. I was being hunted in my daydream by a carnivore. I think it was a dinosaur. perhaps an Allosaurus, Albertosaurus, or maybe even a Tyrannosaurus rex. In my waking dream state, I didn't pause to inquire too minutely as to its species. But somehow, in my concern, this was not a nightmare. It wasn't a daymare. I was overwhelmed by the knowledge at that moment that nothing could happen to me that was amiss, even in the face of a great big mouth full of sharp teeth. I might live to face another day, or I might perish in the jaws of that predator. Either way, with me, what I felt deep inside of me was that all would be well. What was really important could not be threatened or destroyed by even the most awful of fates. The message for me then was, no harm can actually come to us, for to die is natural. And whether we are in life or whether we are in death, we are always and ever enfolded in the arms of the universe. Nothing can wrench us away from that all. For, and this is yet another message, we are all part of that great allness, and even in life, when most of the time we feel divided from other people and other things, we can occasionally be put in touch with that universal whole, sensing that existence which underlies and supports our life. And we can bask in that allness that we will receive back, and we will receive that back when our existence as individuals is done. An existence which forms but a momentary interlude. I like to think of it as sort of like a vacation adventure outside our normal peaceful state. Now, when I've been on vacation in this life, vacation from my vacation, especially one that takes me far away, across the ocean to another continent, I feel that those few short weeks that I'm in in those few short weeks that I'm there, I'm in another existence. It's like I'm living another life. As I enjoy myself in my other life, trying to deal with situations and customs different from my own, courting adventures that I would studiously avoid if I were back in my peaceful life back home, I also see the clock ticking away. I'm living a life away from life, and I know that this life and this adventure that I'm having must also end. So I think here we have a model, a kind of a parable for life and death, but with the comfort of knowing pretty much exactly what awaits us when we get back home after our return flight, our mini-death, so to speak. But talking like this, it still seems as if I am claiming that there might be some individual afterlife for us once we have returned to the oneness of everything. But it is much more likely, I believe, and more logical, I think, to consider that before and after death, there are no boundaries making individual souls within the universal whole. Having taken the big trip home, having rejoined the allness, it is likely we will actually have no remaining shred of individual existence. We will be like a drop of water rejoining the vast ocean. Now, from our present point of view, loving, as I trust that we do, our individual existences, this sounds pretty hopeless. so far as a future afterlife is concerned. But that word future, and indeed the word after, forming part of the word afterlife, should alert us that we need to re-examine our general understanding of time. Our consciousness runs along with the arrow of time in the four-dimensional space-time universe that we experience. But what if we could take a different path? What if we could take a different path through time and space and not follow that straight-ahead arrow? What if we could step beyond our four dimensions and look at those four dimensions? Then, just as we can now see a three-dimensional object, like a book or a chair, and we look at it all in one glance, just like we can do that right now, stepping aside from the fourth dimension, we will be able to see a living being in all of its phases of life at once: conception, birth, growth, achievements, decay, and death. Now, because an object like a book has boundaries, because it has a limited extension in space, doesn't mean that elsewhere other than that book ceases to exist. It has, as we say, object permanence. We can put it down, we can look away from it, and then we can go back and look for it and fetch it. In the same way, a life considered as a four-dimensional object always exists and never ceases to be. The analog of its left edge is birth, and the analog of its right edge is death. There are places and times where it is, and other places and times where it is not. But a life is always there where it was put, where it is ever happening. It can be gone back to, excuse me, it can be gone back to, and it can be looked at again. This is comforting in the sense that we know our life will always exist and will never be lost. Though my voice can be lost. The universe can read over that life. The universe can wallow in the achievements and the fun, while skipping over the dental appointments, of course. And as the poet and preacher John Donne said, all mankind is of one author and is one volume. And when one dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated. God's hand is in every translation, and his hand shall bind up our scattered leaves again for that library where every book shall lie open to one another. We can get a sense of this from reading biographies. In reading these books, we can relive many other lives, cheering on their protagonists' struggles, sympathizing with their sorrows, and rejoicing in their achievements. People live in us again and again as we read about them, study them, and even just think about them. Of course, not everyone has a biography that's written about them, but in the universe encompassing all of time, all existences are important, and the books that they're written on are not the physical books that we write, but they're written on the very structure of the universe and exist forever in what amounts to an eternal library. So by living just once, we are creating something permanent. If, however, we blot our copybook, those blots will be there for all time. If we earn a star, however, that star will ever shine, casting many a blot into insignificance. Thus, it is a grave responsibility for us while living to shape our lives. When we are outside the blotted yet shining existence, when we are no longer in existence and have no particular responsibility for it, there is no extra life punishment, for there is no one to punish, and it would in any case be meaningless and unproductive to do so. But within our sometimes blotted but always well-shaped and luminous existence, there is consciousness of having done well, and it is our job in the now, when we are still inside the flowing stream of time, to create something lasting in the universe. To have done a good job makes our lives lasting achievements that the universe can revisit time and again. How do we do well? There are many ways to do this, and we are all given different gifts and opportunities. We must all follow our various forms of genius. No one can instruct us as to how to be the ideal forms of ourselves. We must and we can find that out for ourselves. But how do we avoid the blots? A clue is found in the same meditation of John Donne. No one is an island entire of himself. Everyone is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. So the very fact that when our existence is done, we are a part of the whole means that we are mingled with everyone, with every man, every woman, with every human, and with every non-human creature that exists, not only on earth, but to the very ends of the universe. We will have lived all lives. All those translations that are bound up together will be equally our own. Therefore, what we do unto another in our lives, we do to ourselves. So if we keep this in mind, that underneath we are each other, we may make many mistakes, but we will never do very badly. And as the Christian scripture says, in words set to music in Handel's Oratorio, and by the way, his birthday is next month. In Handel's Oratorio, Messiah, one sings, "The trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed." We shall indeed be changed. We shall be vastly different from who we are now and what we are now. I shall be you, and equally you shall be me. I shall have nothing, and you shall have nothing. But we together shall have everything. To be too attached to what we think we as individuals own, as the Buddhists know, is to suffer. There is also suffering in this life if we are attached to and anxious about fantasies of individual existence in the afterlife. What we need is not these fantasies, but trust. We are always and forever a part of everything. As the mystics know, the great change is actually no change at all. In this life, or beyond this life, we safely dwell in the allness of everything. And may we all go out, when we do, amid the choir that sings Mozart.